The following program is presented by NET Connects in partnership with the Nebraska Equal Opportunity Commission.
Housing discrimination happens in Nebraska. It's a fact we may not want to believe, but one that should not be ignored. I'm Stan Odenthal, Executive Director of the Nebraska Equal Opportunity Commission. According to Nebraska's Fair Housing Act, discrimination occurs when a person is harmed in attaining the use of housing and the harm occurred because of their national origin, race, color, gender, religion, disability, familial status, or in retaliation for exercising a housing right guaranteed by the Nebraska Fair Housing Act. On this program, we will provide information for landlords and tenants about what your rights are, how you can avoid being in violation or being violated against, and where you can get help if you find yourself as the target of discrimination. Before I introduce the panel, let's take a look at one person's example of discrimination based on a disability.
Mobility is difficult for Kennetta Wainwright due to her spinal cord injury. She explored several options when seeking help getting a handicap parking spot at her apartment.
On the property, there is no handicap parking. In the summertime, the residents that were currently residing there, they were always on the go, so there would be more spaces available closer to my apartment. But once it started getting colder, then the spaces became very limited or unavailable.
A reasonable accommodation is related to a person with a disability.
Joe Garcia works for the Fair Housing Center of Nebraska and Iowa. They answer a lot of landlord-tenant questions and investigate discrimination in housing.
There has to be a nexus between the disability and the request. For example, I have PTSD, but I am requesting you to go do my grocery shopping. There's no connection between the request and the disability, whereas a person with a mobility issue is requesting a handicap spot closer to the unit because of their issues with mobility. There's the connection.
And then my landlord starts saying things like, well, you have no business out during inclement weather anyway. You have no business going out if there's a rainstorm anyway. I didn't understand why that was the response instead of sensitivity and saying, oh, well, of course, we'll just, create a parking space.
Another common example of reasonable accommodation requests involves companion animals.
A landlord has a no pet policy, and they're always told to treat everybody straight across the board equally. Well, I can't let you have your pet because then everyone's going to want their pet. I'm treating everybody equally. Well, once again, if it wasn't for my disability and I didn't need this therapeutic animal that's doctor prescribed, I wouldn't ask you for a waiver in your policy. So that landlord has to allow that reasonable accommodation. They can't ask what that disability is, but they can ask a note from that person's therapist or their doctor or anyone who is aware of the situation.
Amber Marker is the Deputy Director of Nebraska Housing Developers Association. She works with a tenant education program called RentWise that helps people find and keep decent, safe, affordable rental housing that meets their needs.
Some landlords may say, I'll let you do this, but I want you to pay for it. And they can do that.
There's not very many places that have affordability, especially for people with handicap, and you want a nice neighborhood. I like my apartment. It's accessible to everything, including 3 bus lines. It's not as easy as people think for people with handicaps to just, why don't you just move?
One thing Wainwright did was document her incidents with photos and in writing.
It's a very complex system, and for the layperson, we don't know anything about law.
Marker says this is key when wanting to file a complaint.
Document, 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 and make sure that you have, copies of letters that have been sent, but really just making sure that you do have proof that you notified the landlord of these issues. Because it's very hard to prove that those things happen. It's one person's word versus the other.
For more information or links to resources, go to our website at netnebraska.org/fairhousing. We want to thank Ms. Wainwright for sharing her story with us, and also Joe Garcia from the Fair Housing Center of Nebraska and Iowa, as well as Amber Marker from the Nebraska Housing Developers Association for helping us understand some of these complex laws. Disability discrimination is a big issue. Almost 40% of the housing discrimination complaints filed with the NEOC are based on reasonable accommodation. On our panel today is Ben Watson, the Nebraska Equal Opportunity Commission's Director of Education and Outreach, Rita Grease, Realtor and NEOC Vice Chair, and Kimberly Taylor Riley, Director of Equity and Diversity for the City of Lincoln. Thank you all for being here. Now, Kim, we just watched a very moving video segment about an individual with a disability requesting a reasonable accommodation from their landlord. So what are the steps that an individual with a disability should take when requesting a reasonable accommodation from their landlord or property manager?
Well, initially they need to make sure and make contact with that person. They're not going to know that you need an accommodation if you don't let them know. So we need to start with some sort of dialogue. Usually people will go and do it verbally, but we usually advise them to do it in writing. Part of that is because you want to make a record that you made the request. And that's kind of part of that making the paperwork trail that she was talking about. Secondly, it gives the landlord something tangible that they can then look at and say, okay, this person is requesting this particular thing, and they can give them a specific response to that request. So ultimately what you're doing is trying to start that dialogue to see about getting your needs met. But you have to put people on notice, and the best way really to do that is in writing.
Mm-hmm. So is a doctor's note required then in some instances?
It's not necessarily required. Normally what happens is that there needs to be some documentation to support the request. Mm-hmm. It's not always from a doctor. It depends on what the request is. For instance, the young lady in the video was talking about needing a handicap parking spot. She might need to get something from her doctor, but she might not, because you might have noticed in the video the way that she walked and her gait and her difficulty getting in and out of the car. Probably the landlord's on notice that she has some sort of limitation, even if he's not sure what the specifics of it are. So she may not need to do that in order for them to be able to accommodate her. But in the event that it's asked for, that's certainly something that's reasonable for her to have to secure.
Great. Now, Ben, you head up our housing unit. So with that, is a landlord always required to comply with the reasonable accommodation request?
Well, what a landlord is technically required to do when the landlord receives an accommodation request is enter into what we call an interactive process, where the landlord needs to engage with the disabled person to figure out a way to accommodate them. A lot of times that will be granting the particular accommodation request the person made, but the landlord doesn't necessarily have to do exactly what the person said if the particular request is going to be prohibitively expensive, for instance. And at that point, the landlord can't just give up and say no to the person who's disabled and asking for the request. So they should work with that person in that interactive process to come up with a different or a solution that will work for both parties.
Great. So what are some common reasonable accommodation requests that happen?
Well, the parking space example, like from the video, is very common. Another common accommodation request we get a lot these days is for assistance animals, which are animals that either help in a specific way with a disability. The most common example of that would be a seeing eye dog for a blind individual, or also an emotional support animal for someone who has a mental or an emotional disability, to help comfort that person when the animal has been prescribed by a doctor. Those are probably the two most common examples, but really any accommodation is just an exception to a policy or a procedure that the landlord has. So anytime a policy procedure that your landlord has is standing in the way of you fully enjoying your property as a disabled individual, you can make an accommodation request.
Great. Now, Rita, you're a commissioner with the Nebraska Equal Opportunity Commission, which means that you meet on a monthly basis and make determinations on housing cases. What are you seeing as far as reasonable accommodations go with those cases?
Well, I think one of the most popular accommodations or newer accommodations is the companion animal. And that was illustrated in the video here. But a lot of landlords are ignorant to that request. They're not aware of the fact that they need to make that as a reasonable accommodation. So it's critical that landlords educate themselves before they endeavor to be a landlord, and that they stay on top of the laws and their responsibilities.
Great, great. So now what happens if a reasonable accommodation request is denied? What's the next step that a tenant can take?
Well, I get it depends, like everything else. Normally, it depends on whether or not there's an appeals process in place. Some facilities will actually have someone else that you can take your request to, someone above the decision maker for you to make that request. And if that's available, then certainly we would expect you to go through that process. Other times there may not be. And at that point, you've got some options in terms of what agencies you reach out to. Where I work is only within the city limits of the city of Lincoln. That's where our jurisdiction is. So if it happens there, they can certainly reach out to us. If it gets to be in the rural parts of the state, then the NEOC is the better companion to go to in terms of trying to get some redress with respect to trying to get your needs met. But the Fair Housing Center of Nebraska and Iowa is always a good option because they work with you and they kind of, for lack of a better term, can advocate on behalf of the person. Our agency and the NEOC are both required to be neutral, and we are neutral fact finders. We discover the information, we report it to our commissioners, and a decision gets made. But if you're wanting to have something done more immediately, a lot of times the Fair Housing Center or someone like that is a good place to reach out to because they may be able to advocate on your behalf and be able to accomplish what you need in a much shorter order than we can investigate a case and get a disposition made.
Now, Ben, what should a tenant expect when they file a complaint with the NEOC?
Well, I think it's important for people to know that you don't need any sort of legal expertise or to even be really brushed up on the laws yourself to file a complaint. That's what our agency exists for, and that's what the Lincoln Commission exists for as well, is we can walk you through the process of filing a complaint. Again, we are a neutral agency, but we also exist to help people work within the law to file a complaint. So. People shouldn't be afraid to do that. But when someone calls us up, we provide them technical assistance and they can ask us questions about the law and we can make them feel comfortable with what the law says and how it might apply to their particular situation. And then if after hearing about the law, they decide that what they've experienced is probably discrimination, they can then file that complaint and they'll go through our investigative process.
So is that technical assistance available then for tenants as well as landlords?
Yes, anyone in the state can call up. We're funded by everyone's tax dollars, so everyone is welcome to call us and ask us questions. And we do mostly get technical assistance questions from tenants who believe they've been discriminated against, but we occasionally get calls from landlords. And I honestly believe, or honestly, I wish that landlords would call us more often because we are happy to assist them as well.
Now, we've been talking about reasonable accommodations. Is an accommodation and a modification the same thing?
They're slightly different. An accommodation, as I said earlier, is an exception to a rule or a policy or a procedure, where a modification is an actual physical change to the unit or the house or if the person is renting. So we've given a couple examples of accommodations, which are exceptions to rule, like a parking place or an assistance animal. An example of a modification would be if you are renting a home and you need a wheelchair ramp installed on the front door. That would be a modification where there needs to be an actual physical change to the building, adding that ramp on. The main difference that tenants and landlords need to be aware of there is that although the tenant still asks the permission of the landlord or makes the request of the landlord to get that modification, the tenant may be required to pay for the modification, where the landlord or housing provider is required to pay for an accommodation.
Great answers, everyone. Thanks for that information, very insightful. One thing to remember when considering filing a complaint is that it must be done within 1 year of the noted discrimination. Let's take a look at another alleged example of a protected class discrimination case, this one based on race, national origin, and religion.
There are several resources available to landlords and tenants regarding housing discrimination laws. A majority of problems arise when one party or the other is unclear about those laws.
There's a lot of landlords out there that just don't know what they can and cannot do. I don't think landlords are specifically malicious and purposely break the laws or do things that they're not supposed to.
Shukri Abdi helped several members of the Somali community find the resources needed to address their issues.
The complaints were because the owner of the building just came to the apartment without notice. He will either come early in the morning, like weird hours, 5 in the morning, or sometimes he will come at night, step on their playing rats with his shoes.
Under Nebraska law, a landlord can only enter a dwelling when it's under emergency purposes, like the water from upstairs coming downstairs to that apartment, or there's a fire. If it's not an emergency, they have to give a day's notice, and they can only enter at reasonable times.
Paying rent is usually the easiest way to keep a landlord happy. But according to Abdi, even that task is a challenge.
He doesn't take a check. He doesn't take a money order. He wants cash. He doesn't want dollars. I mean, if he's $6.75, the $5 has to be $5. If you give him like loose dollars, like $1, $2, he will throw at you. If they have a problem with the utilities broke or something broke in the house and they call him, he wouldn't fix for them. And if they pay for it, he will still charge them again extra. And then he will tell them, why did you call somebody else to fix it?
This is an extreme example of housing discrimination involving protected class that highlights one side of the story. But there are places to turn for help.
And the best way to stay out of trouble is to get a training, fair housing training, a landlord-tenant training.
In many of these cases, the language barrier is part of the problem.
Most of them, they cannot even speak to him and tell him straight away to his face that what they want to say, so he's taking advantage of them. And also they don't know the system much of them, and they don't know how to complain to, who to complain to.
The communication piece is huge, because we teach not just how to communicate, but how to listen, and active listening, and making sure that people understand what you're saying and you understand what they're saying, because there's so many things that can happen and miscommunication that can occur if everybody's not on the same page.
It's important for tenants to understand the laws as well. Not everything adds up to discrimination.
Last year, we took in over 1,200 calls. Of the over 1,200 calls we took, it was about 250 that had an actual basis for possible discrimination.
The overall goal is for people to get along, to have a safe, enjoyable place to live. A landlord and a tenant is a partnership, and just knowing your rights and responsibilities and being able to work together is key in being able to have those two components.
There's a lot to cover in a half an hour. If you want more information about anything we're covering here, or would like to watch this program again, visit netnebraska.org/fairhousing. Let's bring in the panel again. Welcome back, panel. Now, Rita, we just got done watching a video segment where it appears that an individual was targeted for discrimination based off of his national origin. Are the commissioners seeing cases like this?
Yes, and all across the state of Nebraska, because of employment opportunities, we have large refugee populations in various communities. Some of those communities have a shortage of housing to start with, and we're running into cases just like was illustrated here, where we have conflict between the tenants and the landlord. Poor communication or lack of communication, and sometimes we have discrimination caused because of ignorance of the law. Sometimes it's because of animosity, but in any regard, the laws are violated, and people need to report those and find a place to receive help and relief from that kind of treatment.
So this really varies from community to community, right?
Yes, it does. I mean, I think the numbers vary from one community to the other, but you know, none of the state is exempt from this type of thing, unfortunately.
Yeah. Now, Ben or Kim, have you guys seen anything similar where groups of individuals are being targeted for housing discrimination based off of their national origin or religious beliefs?
Sure. I mean, this seems to happen when you have a particular group of refugees come in a large group, and they all kind of settle in one place. Maybe they're purposefully put into like one apartment complex. So then that entire apartment complex becomes just that refugee population, and then they are. I don't know why it happens, but some landlords feel like they can mistreat that situation, and so that's kind of what we're seeing is that sort of thing repeated both out in rural areas as well as also in Omaha and Lincoln as well.
Mm-hmm.
What we are seeing is something where the refugees will report that they feel that they're being treated differently even from folks who are here in the United States. For example, you'll have folks that are from maybe the Sudan who have a distinctive appearance and a distinctive skin color, and will actually say that they don't feel that they're necessarily being discriminated against because of their natural origin. They're instead feeling that they're being discriminated against because of their color, because someone like me, who is an African American, they'll say is being treated better than they are, not because of them being from the Sudan particularly and me not being, but instead because of their color, because they're distinctively different in terms of their appearance, and they feel that their color is the reason that they're being discriminated against over their national origin.
Now, could you talk a little bit about protected classes under fair housing laws?
What we try to describe protected classes for people is it's a group of folks that have been discriminated against historically. So it's something that the government has reached out and decided to protect because of an ongoing issue relative to basically disadvantaging these people on the basis of some immutable trait, their national origin, their skin color, their religion, their gender. The other thing that we have to remember is when we're talking about protected classes, we're not just talking about one. All of us on this panel belong to protected classes. Right now, today, belong to more than one as we sit here. What a protected class is something that can be aggregated. We can all have more than one. And what we're talking about is not that you're in a protected class or that you're not in one, meaning that because you're a Caucasian male does not mean that you're not in a protected class. What puts you in a protected class is that you have those traits and that those traits are what is used to make a decision relative to your housing ability. That is what puts you in the protected class. So it's not what class you're in, it's not whether you're male or female, it's not whether you're from the United States or from Europe. It's instead whether or not that is the determining factor as to whether or not they're going to rent to you, whether or not they're going to let you buy property, or where they're going to let you live or buy property.
Great. Now, Ben, is there a way that a group of individuals can file a complaint collectively?
Certainly. It can be very scary to come forward if you are experiencing discrimination in your housing. You may be nervous about making a complaint. You may be afraid that you may be retaliated against. I know people feel a lot more comfortable. They can come forward in a group, and that is definitely possible. A group of people could come to the NEOC or the Lincoln Commission and could file a complaint together on one complaint, or they could file individually different complaints, and those complaints would be investigated simultaneously against that same landlord. But that is certainly very possible.
So now, if these individuals don't have a high level of proficiency with English, are there resources available to help them with that?
Yes, we do have resources for that. We have interpreters that we contract with, both for phone and for in-person. We make sure that we have interpreters available at our commission meetings, so that when someone's case is decided, they can understand what the decision is and hear the summary of their case being read. So yes, it's very important to us that we make sure to do that both with foreign language interpreters as well as with sign language interpreters for the deaf.
Now, Rita, you're a commissioner with the Nebraska Equal Opportunity Commission. You do that voluntarily. You're one of 7 governor-appointed commissioners. But in your day-to-day life, you're a managing broker of a major real estate agency. So what advice could you give real estate agents to ensure that the individuals that they're representing, whether it's buying or selling a house, are not being discriminated against when they're doing so?
This is something the National Association of Realtors, and through that the state and local associations also highly emphasize. It's required to take the training before you ever obtain a license, before you ever become a member of the realtor organization. And we do a lot. We have a lot of ways we illustrate the abiding by the fair housing laws. We also strive to educate the public about fair housing laws, because when we're selling real estate or when we're leasing real estate, it involves not only the parties directly involved, but it involves a lot of indirect participation. And so the continual education of fair housing for all is really the best defense against discrimination, we believe. And so we strive to do that on a day-to-day basis.
Now, Ben mentioned something earlier about individuals maybe a little bit scared to come forward with a claim of discrimination. Now, Kim, what protections are in place to protect individuals when they are filing a claim about discrimination in the housing context?
Well, what the government anticipates is that there can be occasions when there is some backlash based on you having filed a complaint. And what they call that is retaliation. Retaliation is what we call its own animal. So what that means is you can actually have a retaliation claim even if you weren't the first person that filed the complaint to begin with. It can happen to you because you were a witness. It can happen to you because you participated in the investigation. I've even had cases where it happened where they assumed that you participated in the investigation, but that wasn't actually the case. But because they think that that has happened, you notice that things are different for you, that perhaps when you make a call and you ask for a repair to your apartment, they don't come timely, or maybe they don't come at all. Maybe you are starting to experience the coming in the middle of the night, or the refusing to notify you ahead of time. When those kinds of things start to happen, those can be considered retaliation. So what we do is at the commission, we encourage people to please make a call. We have information available on our website. You can go onto our website. It's lincoln.ne.gov, and it's /human rights. You can go right into there. We have all kinds of information available for you on there. And there is a complaint that you can at least begin the process of filling out and submit that to us, and one of the investigators will get back to you. We have a full-time outreach coordinator that does much what Ben does. And because we have that person available as well, if there are folks that you think are in need of training, if you reach out to us, we will have her come out and train your group. I personally will go out and train groups if I'm asked. So we do try to do as much outreach as we can, but we just can't be everywhere. So we do encourage people to give our agency a call, give the NEOC a call, make contact with us if you have questions. If things are happening and you just don't think they're quite right, talk to us about it, and we will try to do the best we can. If we can't help you, we will refer you to somebody who can.
Great, thank you for that thought. Now, Rita or Ben, we have quite a few landlords and tenants that are watching this program. Do you have any final thoughts for those viewers?
Well, I would just say that we don't want the relationship between landlords and tenants to be antagonistic. This should be a cooperative thing. You know, when we're going back to talking about reasonable accommodations, it shouldn't have to come to the point where someone files a complaint on that. The two should come together. I mean, they already have a business relationship, paying rent every month and doing maintenance on the apartment. Requesting a reasonable accommodation should just be another part of that business, and hopefully we can get landlords and tenants to come together and work together to do that, and also within the other protected classes as well.
And Rita, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, in real estate, there are classes to take for future homeowners to teach them how to be homeowners. And it would be wonderful if we had required classes for people to learn how to be landlords. I know in Lincoln there is an organization called Riomo that does concentrate on helping them all become better landlords. And we just need more of that. We need more education. We need more awareness of how to be a better landlord, and it would help tremendously.
Great, thank you. So we're coming to the end of our time. Thanks Ben, Rita, and Kimberly for your insights on the panel, and thanks to Joe Garcia and Amber Marker for their expertise on the topics as well. Through this program, we hope that you've seen how to be a better landlord, tenant, or lending agent. If you're following the rules and you're still being discriminated against, there are resources available to help. Remember, you can find links to these resources or watch the program again at netnebraska.org/fairhousing. Thanks for watching. I'm Stan Odenthal with Housing Discrimination in Nebraska, an up-close look. Take care.